I'm 70 years old, living in the same property I've owned since 1958, and for 35 years I've kept the biggest secret anyone could imagine. In my barn, hidden from the world, lives a Bigfoot I found injured in the woods when I was just 35 years old. I've protected him, cared for him, and kept him safe from a world that would never understand. But this year, in March of 1993, the military discovered what I'd kept hidden for decades, and the consequences began almost immediately. Consequences that will shock you once you hear the full truth. My name is Gary Thompson, and in March 1958 I was 35 years old, working as a logger in the forests of northern Idaho, just outside the town of Priest River. I'd been in the timber industry since I was 18, following in my father's footsteps. It was hard, dangerous work, but honest, and it paid well enough that I'd been able to buy 40 acres of forested land with a small house and a large barn. Back in '58, I was just a regular guy trying to make a living cutting timber. I drove a 1955 Chevy pickup, listened to Elvis Presley on my AM radio, and spent weekends maintaining my property or drinking beer with the other loggers at Murphy's Bar in town. That March was colder than usual. Snow still covered the ground in most places, though it was starting to melt in the afternoons. I was working a section of forest about 2 miles from my property, part of a crew of 6 men felling trees for a lumber company out of Spokane. On March 14, 1958, I was working alone, delimbing a tree we'd just felled, when I heard something that made me stop. It was a sound, low, pained, not quite animal, but not human either. It echoed through the cold forest air. I grabbed my axe. Bear country meant you never went anywhere unarmed, and followed the sound. It led me maybe a quarter mile off from where we'd been working into denser forest that hadn't been logged yet. What I found changed my life forever. There was a creature lying in the snow, partially hidden behind a fallen log. At first, I thought it was a bear that had been injured, maybe caught in a trap or shot by a hunter. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a bear at all. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, even lying down, covered in dark brown hair, matted with blood and ice. But it had arms that ended in hands, not paws. 5-fingered hands with what looked like fingernails. And when it turned its head to look at me, I saw a face that was disturbingly human-like, despite being covered in hair. A Bigfoot. A real, living Bigfoot, bleeding and dying in the Idaho snow. My first instinct was to run, to get back to the crew and tell them what I'd found. But then it made that sound again, that pained, almost pleading sound, and looked at me with eyes that held intelligence, understanding, and fear. It was asking for help. I knelt down in the snow, keeping some distance, but close enough to see the injuries. Its left leg was mangled, caught in what looked like an old bear trap, the illegal kind that some trappers still used despite them being banned. The trap had been there for a while. The wound was infected, swollen, clearly causing immense pain. "Easy," I said, though I had no idea if it could understand me. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature watched me warily but didn't try to move away. Maybe it couldn't. The trap chain was anchored to a tree, and it looked like it had been trapped there for days, maybe longer. I examined the trap mechanism. It was old, rusted, but I knew how these worked from my father teaching me about them years ago. "This is going to hurt," I told the creature, "but we need to get this off you." Using my axe, I pried at the trap's release mechanism. It took nearly 20 minutes of work, and the whole time the creature made sounds of pain but never tried to attack me. Finally, the trap snapped open, and the creature pulled its leg free. The injury was terrible. Deep lacerations, infection spreading through the tissue, probably bone damage. Without treatment, this creature would die. Within days, I made a decision that would define the next 35 years of my life. "My place isn't far," I said. "Can you walk?" The creature looked at me with those intelligent eyes, then slowly, painfully, tried to stand. It managed to get upright, but immediately collapsed, the injured leg unable to bear any weight. I was a strong man, Years of logging had built muscle and endurance, but helping a 7-foot, 600-pound creature through the forest was beyond my capabilities. So I did something desperate. I went back to my truck, got rope and supplies, and over the next 3 hours, using fallen logs as rollers and every ounce of strength I had, I managed to help the creature make its way to my property. By the time we reached my barn, we were both exhausted. I got the creature inside, into one of the old horse stalls, and made a bed of hay for it to lie on. "Stay here," I told it. "I'll get supplies to treat that leg, but you have to stay quiet. Nobody can know you're here." I spent the rest of that day and most of the night cleaning and treating the wound as best I could. I used supplies from my first aid kit, antibiotics I'd been prescribed for an infection months earlier but never finished, and clean bandages. The creature was remarkably tolerant of my ministrations, as if it understood I was trying to help. Over the next few days, I called in sick to work, claiming I had the flu. I spent all my time in the barn tending to the creature's injuries, bringing it food and water. I offered various things: raw meat, which it refused, but cooked meat and vegetables, which it accepted. Bread, fruit, anything I had in my kitchen. And slowly, remarkably, the infection began to recede. The creature started to heal, but something else happened too. We began to communicate, not with words. The creature couldn't speak. Its vocal anatomy wasn't built for human speech, but it learned to nod yes and shake its head no. It would point at things it needed or wanted. It made different sounds that I gradually learned to interpret. One sound for pain, another for hunger, another that seemed to mean gratitude. By the end of March, about 2 weeks after I'd found it, the creature could put weight on its injured leg again. It could walk, though with a limp that would never fully go away. It could have left my barn then, could have returned to the wild. But it didn't, and I didn't ask it to, because by then I'd realized something important. This creature was intelligent, far more intelligent than any animal I'd ever encountered. It understood cause and effect, could problem solve, showed emotions. And it was alone, probably cast out from its group after being trapped. Or perhaps it had been alone to begin with. I was alone too. Never married, no close family, just a logger who kept to himself. And somehow, in that barn, we'd formed a bond. I named him Ben, after my father Benjamin, who'd passed years earlier. Ben seemed to accept the name, responding when I said it. As spring turned to summer in 1958, Ben remained in my barn. I'd made modifications to make it more comfortable, insulated the walls, added a wood stove for heat, created a space where he could move around, but wouldn't be visible from outside. I brought him food daily, tended to his healing leg, and spent my evenings after work just sitting with him. He was fascinated by human things. I brought him an old radio, and he'd listen for hours to music and talk shows. I showed him magazines, and while he couldn't read, he'd study the pictures intently. He learned to understand quite a bit of English, though he couldn't speak it, and I learned about him. He was gentle, despite his enormous size and strength. He had preferences, liked certain food, certain music. He could be playful, sometimes hiding my tools as a joke. He showed emotions clearly: happiness, sadness, fear, affection. By the fall of 1958, I'd accepted that Ben was going to stay, and that meant I had to be extraordinarily careful about keeping him hidden. I told no one about him. When friends asked why I spent so much time at home, I made excuses. When neighbors commented on the amount of food I was buying, I said I had a big appetite. The years passed. 1960, 1970, 1980, Ben remained in my barn, and I remained his protector and companion. I retired from logging in 1988 at age 65, the standard retirement age. The truth was, I wanted to spend more time with Ben, who was aging too, moving slower, his hair graying around the face and shoulders. By 1993, Ben had been living in my barn for 35 years. I was 70 years old. He was probably in his 60s or 70s, based on my estimates. We'd grown old together, in secrecy, in companionship. And then, in March 1993, exactly 35 years after I'd found him, everything changed. The military came. March 15th, 1993, started like any other morning. I woke at 6 a.m., made coffee in my kitchen, and headed out to the barn with breakfast for Ben. Scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit. At 70 years old, my routine was well established, and Ben's was too. We'd been living this way for 35 years. But that morning, as I approached the barn, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Tire tracks in the muddy driveway that weren't mine. Fresh tracks from the night before based on how the edges had dried. Someone had been on my property. I hurried into the barn. Ben was in his usual corner, the modified stall I'd built for him decades ago. But he was agitated. He made a low sound when he saw me, the one that meant he was worried. "Did you hear something last night?" I asked him. He nodded emphatically, then pointed toward the barn's north wall, the side that faced the forest. He made gestures I'd come to understand. People, multiple people, watching. "Someone was out there," I said, my heart sinking. Someone saw something. I'd been so careful for 35 years. I only let Ben outside at night, and only in the enclosed area behind the barn that was hidden from view by trees. I bought supplies in different towns to avoid suspicion. I never had visitors, never let anyone in the barn, but after 35 years, maybe I'd gotten complacent. Maybe I'd made a mistake. 3 hours later, at 9:15 a.m., 3 black vehicles pulled into my driveway. Not police cars, not sheriff's department, unmarked black SUVs with government plates. My worst fears were confirmed. I watched from my kitchen window as 6 men got out, all wearing dark suits and sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. Military or federal agents, no question. They moved with the precision and authority of people used to getting their way. The lead man knocked on my door. When I opened it, he held up credentials. "Mr. Gary Thompson, I'm Colonel James Hardwick, U.S. Army. We need to speak with you about your property and certain observations that have been made recently." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but my voice betrayed me. 35 years of secrecy, and I'd never prepared for this moment. "Mr. Thompson, we have satellite thermal imaging from last night showing 2 distinct heat signatures on your property. One matches human parameters. The other," he paused, "the other is significantly larger and doesn't match any known animal indigenous to this region. Satellites. They'd been watching from space. How could I have known? How could I have protected against that?" "May we come in?" Hardwick asked, but it wasn't really a question. I let them in because I had no choice. 6 armed federal agents weren't going to be turned away. They spread out through my small house, professional and efficient, while Hardwick sat across from me at my kitchen table. "Mr. Thompson, we're not here to arrest you or cause trouble, but we need to know what you have in that barn. And before you deny it, understand that we've been monitoring this location for 3 days. We know something unusual is here." "How did you find out?" I asked, defeated. "Anonymous tip came in last week. Someone claimed to have seen a large bipedal creature behind your barn late at night. We get hundreds of Bigfoot reports every year. Most are nonsense. But this one came with photographs taken with a telephoto lens. We investigated, deployed surveillance, and confirmed the presence of an anomalous biological entity on your property." "Photographs," I repeated. Someone had been watching. Someone with a camera. 35 years of secrecy, destroyed by a nosy neighbor or a curious hiker. "We need to see what's in the barn, Mr. Thompson. You can cooperate, or we can get a warrant and federal marshals. Your choice." I looked at this colonel, at his stern face and military bearing, and I thought about Ben, about 35 years of companionship, of trust, of protection. And I thought about what would happen if I said no. They'd come anyway, probably with more force, and Ben would be terrified. "He's not dangerous," I said quietly. "His name is Ben. He's been with me since 1958. He's..." He's my friend." Hardwick's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You've been harboring an unknown biological entity for 35 years? I've been protecting him. I found him dying in a trap and I saved his life. He stayed because he wanted to and I let him. Because neither of us had anyone else." "Mr. Thompson, do you understand the implications of what you're saying? If what you claim is true, this is the most significant zoological discovery in modern history." "I know what it is. That's why I kept him hidden. Because people like you would want to study him, experiment on him, lock him in a lab somewhere. He's not a specimen. He's a living being with thoughts and feelings and intelligence." "We need to see him," Hardwick said firmly. I stood up slowly, my 70-year-old joints protesting. "I'll take you to him, but I'm warning you, he's never been around this many strangers. He might be frightened. If your men try to hurt him, We're not here to hurt anything, Mr. Thompson. We're here to verify, document, and secure. That's all." I led them across the yard to the barn, my heart heavy with the knowledge that I was about to betray Ben's trust. For 35 years, I'd promised to keep him safe. Now I was leading armed military personnel directly to him. When I opened the barn door, the agents spread out, hands near their weapons. Hardwick stayed beside me as we walked to Ben's stall. "Ben," I called out. "It's me, don't be afraid. These people, they found out about you, but I won't let them hurt you." Ben appeared from the shadows of his stall, and I heard several of the agents gasp. Even expecting it, seeing a 7-foot Bigfoot for the first time was shocking. Ben looked at the strangers, then at me, his eyes full of fear and confusion. He made a questioning sound. Why did I bring these people here? "I'm sorry," I told him. "I'm so sorry. They found out." Colonel Hardwick stepped forward slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to ask it to come out where we can see it fully." "He has a name," I said sharply. "It's Ben, and he's not an it. He's a he. My apologies. Can you ask Ben to come out?" I looked at Ben, and I could see he was trembling slightly. Fear of the unknown, of these strangers invading his safe space. "Ben, can you come out here? Just for a minute. I promise they won't hurt you." Ben hesitated, then slowly walked out of the stall, his limp from the old injury still evident after all these years. He stood in the center of the barn, and the full impact of his presence hit everyone in the room. 7 feet tall, probably 650 pounds now, in his old age, covered in graying brown hair. His hands were massive but gentle. His face showed intelligence and, right now, fear. One of the agents raised a camera and started taking photographs. Ben flinched at the flash. "Stop that," I snapped. "You're scaring him." "We need documentation," Hardwick said. But he gestured for the photographer to stop using flash. For the next hour, they observed Ben from a distance. Hardwick asked questions while his men took measurements, photographs without flash, and notes. Ben stayed close to me, occasionally touching my shoulder as if to make sure I was still there. Has he ever shown aggression?" Hardwick asked. "Never. Not once in 35 years. He's gentle, peaceful. The only time he's ever been upset is when he's scared or in pain." "Can he communicate?" "Not with speech, but yes. He understands English, quite a bit of it. He can nod, shake his head, point, use gestures. We've developed our own communication system over the years. Intelligence level? High. Problem-solving ability, emotional complexity, memory, learning capacity. He's not human, but he's not just an animal either. He's somewhere in between." Hardwick was quiet for a moment, studying Ben with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Mr. Thompson, I need to inform you that under the National Security Act and certain classified protocols, what you have here falls under federal jurisdiction. We'll need to transport him to a secure research facility for proper study." "No," I said immediately. "Absolutely not. You're not taking him anywhere." "I'm afraid you don't have a choice. This creature represents a potentially unknown species. It needs to be properly studied, its origins determined, its physiology documented. He's lived here peacefully for 35 years. He doesn't need to be studied in some government lab. Mr. Thompson, I understand your attachment, but this is bigger than you or your relationship with this creature. This is a matter of national security and scientific importance. Ben made a sound, distressed, confused. He could sense the tension, could tell something bad was happening. I stepped between Ben and the colonel. He's not going anywhere. I've protected him for 35 years and I'll keep protecting him. You'll have to shoot me first. Hardwick looked at me, a 70-year-old logger standing protectively in front of a Bigfoot, and something in his expression softened slightly. "Let me make a phone call," he said. "Wait here." He walked outside with one of his agents, leaving 4 armed men watching Ben and me in the barn. For 15 minutes, we stood there in tense silence. Ben moved closer to me, his hand on my shoulder, both of us knowing our life together was probably over. When Hardwick returned, his expression was different, more thoughtful, less rigid. "Mr. Thompson, I've spoken with my superiors. We're prepared to offer you a compromise, but you need to hear us out before you refuse." Colonel Hardwick gestured for me to step outside with him, leaving his men to watch Ben in the barn. We stood in my yard, the March air cold and damp, while he explained what his superiors had decided. "Mr. Thompson, what I'm about to tell you is classified. The government has been aware of these creatures for some time. Not widely known, this information is restricted to specific military and intelligence divisions. We've had reports, some photographic evidence, even a few tissue samples collected over the years, but we've never had access to a living specimen." "Ben's not a specimen," I said automatically. "I understand. And apparently, so does someone higher up the chain of command. I spoke with a General Peterson at the Pentagon. He's overseen our cryptozoological monitoring program for the past 15 years. When I explained your situation, 35 years of peaceful cohabitation, the creature's apparent docility, and your protective relationship, he saw an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "Instead of taking Ben to a facility, we keep him here. Your property becomes a designated research station, classified and secured. You continue caring for him as you have been, but with government support and oversight. A small team of researchers would be stationed nearby to study him non-invasively, and you'd be our primary liaison." I stared at him, not quite believing what I was hearing. "You'd let him stay here? With me?" "With conditions. Your property would be placed under federal control, technically eminent domain, but you'd retain living rights for life. We'd install security systems, monitoring equipment, and establish a perimeter. The research team would have regular access for observation and data collection, and you'd be required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements." "What about Ben? What would they do to him?" "Non-invasive study only, medical examinations with your cooperation and his, if he'll tolerate it. Behavioral observations, DNA samples from hair or saliva, nothing surgical." The general was very clear. After 35 years of peaceful existence, forcing aggressive research would likely traumatize the subject and compromise data quality. "You've created an unprecedented situation here, Mr. Thompson. A habituated Bigfoot that trusts a human. That's more valuable for research than any examination we could force." "And if I say no?" Hardwick's expression hardened slightly. "Then we invoke national security protocols, seize the creature, and transport him to Fort Detrick in Maryland. You'd face potential charges for harboring an unknown biological entity without reporting it, and Ben would spend the rest of his life in a containment facility. It wasn't really a choice, but it was better than I'd feared. I want it in writing," I said. "Everything. That Ben stays here, that the research is non-invasive, that I remain his primary caretaker, all of it documented." "Agreed. The paperwork is being drawn up now. It'll be here by this afternoon. And I want to explain it to Ben first, before any more strangers come. He needs to understand what's happening." Hardwick nodded. "You have 2 hours, then the security team arrives to begin installing equipment." I went back into the barn and Hardwick's men stepped outside to give us privacy. Ben immediately moved to me, making questioning sounds. He could sense my distress, my conflict. "Ben, something's changed," I told him, taking his massive hand in mine. "These people found out about you. I tried to keep you secret, but they have satellites, technology I couldn't hide from. They want to study you." Ben's eyes widened with fear. He shook his head emphatically. "No study, no strangers, no change." I know, but listen, I negotiated. You get to stay here with me. This is still your home. But there will be people watching, observing. They want to learn about you, but they promised not to hurt you. And I'll be here the whole time. I won't let them hurt you." Ben looked at me for a long moment, processing. Then he pointed at me, at himself, and at the barn floor. "Together, here, home." "Yes," I said. "Together, here, home. That doesn't change. But we'll have watchers now. People studying you from a distance. Can you accept that? Because the alternative is they take you away and I'll never see you again." Ben was quiet, thinking. Then slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. He understood the choice: adapt to being observed or lose everything. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it with everything in me. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. I'm sorry our secret is out." Ben made a soft sound and pulled me into what could only be called a hug. For 35 years, he'd been gentle with me, aware of his strength, careful not to hurt me. Now, at 70 years old, I stood in my barn being hugged by a Bigfoot who'd become the closest thing to family I'd ever had. By that afternoon, my property was transformed. Military vehicles arrived with equipment, cameras, sensors, fencing materials. A command trailer was set up at the edge of my property, housing computers and monitoring stations. Security personnel established a perimeter, and within 6 hours, my quiet 40 acres had become a classified government research site. Dr. Ellen Reeves arrived that evening. She was the lead researcher assigned to what they were calling Project Sasquatch, a 50-year-old primatologist from UC Berkeley who'd apparently been consulting with the military's cryptozoology division for years. "Mr. Thompson," she said, shaking my hand, "I want you to know I've spent my career studying great apes in their natural habitats. I understand the relationship between observer and subject, and I respect what you've built with Ben. I'm not here to disrupt that. I'm here to learn from it." "You really think studying him is more important than his peace?" I asked. "I think understanding him is essential for his species' survival," she replied. "Mr. Thompson, if Ben is here, there are likely others out there. The more we learn about their physiology, behavior, and needs, the better we can protect them. Your Ben might be the key to saving his entire species." I hadn't thought about it that way. In 35 years, I'd focused entirely on protecting Ben, never considering there might be others like him out there, hiding, vulnerable. "There are more?" I asked. "We believe so. Scattered reports across the Pacific Northwest. Occasional evidence, but they're incredibly elusive. Ben is the first we've ever had confirmed stable access to. What we learn from him could help us protect the others." Over the next week, the research protocols were established. Dr. Reeves and her team, 3 other scientists and 2 veterinary specialists, would observe Ben from a distance initially. They set up cameras in the barn, monitoring equipment that tracked his movements and behaviors, but they didn't approach him directly yet. I continued my normal routine with Ben, now with the knowledge that everything was being recorded and analyzed. It was strange, performing our daily activities while knowing we were being watched. Ben adapted faster than I expected, though he'd glance at the cameras occasionally with what looked like resignation. On March 23rd, 8 days after the military's arrival, Dr. Reeves asked if I'd bring Ben out to meet the research team properly. "We need to establish some level of interaction," she explained. "If we're going to do any kind of medical examination or sample collection, he needs to at least know who we are." I discussed it with Ben using our communication system. He wasn't enthusiastic, but he nodded agreement. He trusted me, and if I said these people were safe, he'd give them a chance. The meeting was carefully choreographed. Dr. Reeves and one other researcher, Dr. James Park, approached slowly while Ben and I stood in the barn doorway. They stopped 20 feet away and simply stood there, letting Ben observe them without pressure. "Hello, Ben," Dr. Reeves said calmly. "My name is Ellen. This is James. We're scientists. We study primates, creatures like gorillas and chimpanzees. We'd like to learn about you too, if you'll let us." Ben watched them intently, then looked at me. I nodded encouragement. Slowly, Ben raised one hand in what could only be interpreted as a wave, a gesture he'd learned from watching me greet visitors over the years. Dr. Reeves smiled. "It's nice to meet you, Ben. You're quite remarkable." Over the following weeks, Ben gradually accepted the researchers' presence. They'd sit in the barn, far enough away not to threaten him, and simply observe. Sometimes they'd ask me questions about his preferences, his routines, his communication abilities. Ben seemed to understand they were there to watch and learn, not to harm. In early April, Dr. Reeves asked if we could attempt a physical examination. Basic measurements, checking his teeth and joints, collecting hair samples. It took me an hour to explain to Ben what they wanted to do, using gestures and the picture cards I'd made years ago for communication. Ben was nervous, but he agreed. The examination was done slowly, with me present the entire time, narrating everything they were doing, so Ben understood. Dr. Reeves was gentle, respectful, treating Ben with the same consideration she'd show any intelligent being. "His teeth show significant wear," she noted. "He's quite old, probably 65 to 70 years, based on dental aging. He has arthritis in the left leg. I can feel the old injury site. Overall health is remarkably good for his age, though. Whatever you've been feeding him, it's worked." "Home cooking," I said. "Vegetables, fruits, cooked meat, bread, same stuff I eat. His digestive system is clearly adapted. Fascinating." The hair samples revealed DNA that was close to human, but distinct, confirming Ben was indeed a separate species, possibly a parallel evolutionary branch. The researchers were excited, talking about publications and presentations. "No," I said firmly. "You promised this stays classified. Ben's existence doesn't go public. Mr. Thompson, this is the discovery of the century. And if the world knows, every hunter in America will be looking for more like him. You want to protect his species? Keep them secret. Let them live in peace." Dr. Reeves looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right. We'll keep it classified." But I wondered if that promise would hold, and I wondered what would happen when Ben's story inevitably leaked, despite everyone's best intentions. By May 1993, we'd settled into an uneasy routine. The researchers observed Ben daily, collected data on his behaviors and physiology, and gradually learned what I'd known for 35 years. That he was intelligent, emotional, and deserving of respect. But the situation was far from perfect. Ben was declining. At his estimated age of 65 to 70, he was moving slower, sleeping more, eating less. Dr. Reeves noticed it too. "Gary, I'm concerned about his kidney function," she told me one afternoon in early May. "The blood samples we collected show elevated levels that suggest renal insufficiency. It's common in elderly primates, but we need to monitor it closely." "What can we do?" I asked, worry gnawing at me. I'd known Ben was getting old, but facing the reality of his mortality was different. Dietary modifications, keeping him hydrated, monitoring for symptoms. If it worsens, we might need to consider medication, though I'm not sure how his system would process drugs designed for humans or known primates. The idea of losing Ben terrified me. For 35 years, he'd been my constant companion. My mornings started with bringing him breakfast. My evenings ended with sitting beside him while he listened to the radio. The thought of the barn being empty, of not hearing his gentle vocalizations, was unbearable. But there were other complications too. In mid-May, Colonel Hardwick returned with troubling news. "We have a problem, Mr. Thompson. Word is leaking." Despite our security protocols, someone's been talking. We're getting inquiries from civilian cryptozoology groups, questions from journalists. Someone knows something is happening on your property. Who's talking? I demanded. We don't know yet. Could be one of the original agents who saw Ben. Could be someone local who noticed the increased military presence. We're investigating, but the damage may already be done. What does that mean for Ben? It means we need to prepare for increased scrutiny. We're reinforcing the perimeter, increasing security personnel. If this goes public, this property will be surrounded by media and curiosity seekers within hours. The thought made me sick. Ben had lived in relative peace for 35 years, hidden from the world. Now he was becoming the center of a potential media circus. Dr. Reeves had concerns of her own. Gary, the research team wants to expand the study. They're talking about bringing in more specialists, geneticists, neurologists, behavioral psychologists. Some are pushing for more invasive testing, brain scans, extensive tissue sampling. No, I said immediately. That wasn't the deal. Non-invasive only. I agree with you, but I'm getting pressure from above. There are people in the military and scientific community who think we're wasting a unique opportunity by being too cautious. They want hard data, publishable results. They can want whatever they like. Ben stays protected. That's non-negotiable. But I could see the writing on the wall. The more people who knew about Ben, the more pressure there would be to study him more aggressively, to extract maximum scientific value from his existence. The compromise that had let him stay home was being eroded by institutional momentum. Then, on May 24th, everything got worse. I was in the barn with Ben, doing our afternoon routine, when I heard shouting outside. Security alarms were going off, and through the barn window, I could see military personnel running toward the perimeter fence. Colonel Hardwick burst into the barn. "Mr. Thompson, we have intruders on the property. Multiple individuals attempting to breach the fence line with cameras. Stay inside and keep Ben calm." Through the chaos of the next hour, I learned what had happened. A cryptozoology group from Seattle, calling themselves the Pacific Northwest Bigfoot Research Society, had gotten hold of leaked information about the military presence on my property. They'd organized an infiltration attempt, bringing telephoto cameras and recording equipment, hoping to document whatever was being hidden. Security had stopped them before they got close to the barn, but the damage was done. Within 24 hours, the story was everywhere. "Military guards, Bigfoot on Idaho property," read the headline in the Spokane Chronicle. The national tabloids were even more sensational. "Government captures Sasquatch, elderly logger tells all." Except I hadn't told anyone anything. The stories were full of speculation, exaggeration, and outright fabrication. But the core truth was there. Something unusual was on my property, and the military was protecting it. My property was surrounded within 2 days. Media vans, curiosity seekers, protesters demanding the creature's release, hunters who wanted to prove Bigfoot was real. The military established a half-mile perimeter, keeping everyone at distance. But the circus had arrived. Ben could hear the commotion, the helicopters flying overhead, the shouting from beyond the fence, the constant activity. He became increasingly agitated, refusing to eat, pacing in his stall, making distressed sounds I hadn't heard in decades. "It's okay," I told him repeatedly, trying to comfort him. "You're safe here. I won't let them get to you." But I wasn't sure I could keep that promise anymore. On May 27th, General Peterson himself arrived from the Pentagon. He met with Colonel Hardwick, Dr. Reeves, and me in the command trailer. "Gentlemen, Dr. Reeves, we have a situation that's spiraling out of control," Peterson said. He was in his 60s, gray-haired, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in military command. "The media attention is unsustainable. We have protesters, we have hunters trying to sneak under the property, we have senators asking questions. We need to make a decision about how to proceed." "What are our options?" Hardwick asked. Option 1. We evacuate the creature to a secure facility, Fort Detrick or Area 51, somewhere with established protocols for containing classified biological assets. We can control the narrative better if the subject isn't at this compromised location. No, I said immediately. That's not happening. The deal was he stays here. Mr. Thompson, the deal was predicated on maintaining secrecy. That secrecy is gone. The situation has changed. Then we adapt. We don't break our promise to Ben. Peterson looked at me with something that might have been respect. You really care about this creature, don't you? After all these years, it's not just a scientific curiosity to you. He's my friend. He's family. He trusts me to protect him, and I won't betray that trust by letting you ship him off to some government bunker. Then we move to option 2, controlled disclosure. We acknowledge the creature's existence, establish him as a protected individual under federal custody, and turn this facility into an official research station with public awareness, but restricted access. You'd tell the world about him? Dr. Reeves asked. The world already knows something is here. We can either let speculation run wild, or we control the narrative with facts. We present Ben as a protected individual, emphasize his age and fragility, make clear that he's being cared for by Mr. Thompson under scientific supervision. We turn the story from government conspiracy to remarkable conservation effort. I thought about it. Public knowledge meant Ben would never have privacy again. But it also meant legal protection, official recognition, possibly even public sympathy that would prevent anyone from harming him. What happens to him when... I couldn't finish the sentence. When he dies? Peterson said gently. His remains would be studied, preserved, probably end up in the Smithsonian eventually, but while he lives, he'd have protections no other animal in this country has. Federal law would make harming him equivalent to assaulting a federal agent. Anyone who tried to hurt him would face serious charges. And I stay with him until the end? You'd be his official caretaker, employed by the federal government. This would remain your home and his. The research would continue, but you'd have final say over his welfare. That's my promise to you, Mr. Thompson. I looked at Hardwick and Dr. Reeves. Both nodded. They supported this plan. What about the hunters out there, I asked. The people who think Bigfoot should be shot and mounted as a trophy. They'd be committing a federal crime if they tried, and we'd make sure everyone knew it. I thought about Ben in his stall, frightened by the noise and chaos, confused by the changes in his peaceful life. I thought about 35 years of protecting him in secret, and whether it was time to protect him in a different way. Let me talk to Ben, I said. This affects him most of all. He deserves to have a say. I went back to the barn and explained as best I could using our communication system. The world knows about you now. We can keep hiding, or we can be honest. If we're honest, you'll be famous, but you'll also be protected by law. No one will be allowed to hurt you. Ben listened, processing. Then he pointed at me, at himself, and made the gesture for together. As long as we're together, his gesture said, I can adapt. Together, I confirmed, always. That evening, General Peterson held a press conference in Priest River. Standing before cameras and reporters from around the world, he confirmed what everyone had been speculating. Yes, a Bigfoot was living on my property. Yes, it had been there for 35 years, and yes, it was under federal protection. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Some people celebrated the discovery. Others demanded the government release all classified information about Bigfoot. Hunters and trophy seekers raged about being denied their right to hunt the creature. But Ben was safe. The law protected him now, not just secrecy. And as I sat with him that night, listening to the commotion beyond our fences gradually died down, I realized that after 35 years, our secret was finally out. But our friendship remained exactly what it had always been. The months following the public disclosure were unlike anything I could have imagined. My property became one of the most famous locations in America. the place where Bigfoot lived, protected by a 70-year-old logger who'd kept him hidden for 35 years. The military designation of Ben as a protected federal entity had teeth. Within the first week, 3 hunters who'd attempted to breach the perimeter were arrested and faced federal charges. The message was clear. Ben was untouchable. The government that had discovered him was now his fiercest protector. Dr. Reeves worked with the media to control the narrative. She gave carefully managed interviews explaining Ben's age, his fragility, and the remarkable relationship he had with me. She emphasized that he was likely one of the last of his kind, that he deserved dignity and peace in his final years. Public sentiment shifted. The initial frenzy of trophy hunters and skeptics demanding proof gave way to something unexpected: sympathy. People saw the photographs of an elderly creature clearly in decline, living peacefully with the man who'd saved his life decades ago. Protest groups that had demanded Ben's release to the wild realized he'd spent 35 years in captivity and likely couldn't survive in the forest anymore. Children sent drawings. Conservation groups offered funding for his care. The town of Priest River, initially overwhelmed by the attention, began to embrace their unique status as the town where Bigfoot lives. But Ben's health continued to deteriorate. By July, the kidney issues had worsened. Dr. Reeves consulted with veterinary nephrologists and primate specialists from around the country, all working under strict confidentiality agreements. They developed a treatment plan: medications, dietary modifications, increased fluids. I administered everything under Dr. Reeves's supervision. Ben was patient with the pills, the injections, the constant monitoring. He trusted me, even when the treatments were uncomfortable. "How long does he have?" I asked Dr. Reeves one evening in late July. She was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, Gary, I'm surprised he's made it this long. His kidney function is about 30% of normal. Most primates wouldn't survive at this level, but he's tough, and I think," she paused, "I think he's holding on for you." I spent every moment I could with Ben. We'd sit together in the barn like we had for 35 years, listening to the radio or just being present with each other. Sometimes I'd tell him stories about the early days when I'd first found him in that trap, when we'd been figuring out how to communicate. He'd listen, his old eyes focused on me, occasionally reaching out to touch my shoulder with his massive hand, gentle despite his size, careful even in his weakness. August brought a small miracle. Ben rallied. The medication seemed to be working, and he began eating more, moving around the barn with more energy. Dr. Reeves was cautiously optimistic. "Sometimes with kidney disease, you get these periods of stability," she explained. "He might have months, maybe longer. We'll take it day by day." During this time, something remarkable happened. The federal government, responding to public pressure and scientific advocacy, officially designated Bigfoot as a critically endangered species. It became illegal to hunt, harass, or harm any Sasquatch anywhere in the United States. Habitat protection zones were established in areas where sightings had been reported. "They're using Ben's existence to protect others," Dr. Reeves told me. "If there are more out there, they now have legal protection they never had before. Your friend might have just saved his entire species." Ben seemed to understand when I explained this to him. He made a sound that might have been satisfaction, or maybe relief. After decades of hiding, his kind were finally recognized, finally protected. September was beautiful that year. The aspens turned gold, the air was crisp, and Ben seemed almost like his younger self some days. We'd spend afternoons in the barn with the doors open, letting him watch the autumn colors, smell the pine air. The research team had backed off on aggressive data collection, focusing instead on making Ben comfortable. They'd gotten their samples, their measurements, their observations. Now they were just documenting his final days with respect and care. On September 23rd, 35 years and 6 months after I'd first found him in that trap, Ben took a turn for the worse. Dr. Reeves was there within the hour, along with 2 veterinary specialists. They examined him, ran tests, and gave me the news I'd been dreading. His kidneys are shutting down, Gary. We can try dialysis, but I don't think his body can handle it. We're looking at days, maybe a week at most. Can we keep him comfortable? Yes. We'll manage his pain, keep him as comfortable as possible. I'm so sorry. I sent everyone away except Dr. Reeves, who stayed nearby in case Ben's condition changed. I wanted our final time to be just the 2 of us, like it had been for so many years. For 3 days, I sat with Ben as he slowly faded. He was lucid most of the time, aware of me, occasionally responding to my voice. I told him everything I'd been thinking for years, but had never quite expressed. You saved me as much as I saved you, I said, holding his hand. After my father died, after I lost my way, you gave me purpose. You gave me family. You were never just a creature in my barn, Ben. You were my friend, my companion, my reason to keep going. Ben squeezed my hand weakly. He understood. On September 26, 1993, at 3:17 in the morning, Ben took his last breath. I was beside him, my hand on his chest, feeling his heart slow and finally stop. Dr. Reeves was there, too, confirming what I already knew. Ben was gone. The federal government held a memorial service. Scientists, military personnel, and townspeople who'd never met Ben but had been touched by his story attended. General Peterson gave a eulogy that acknowledged Ben not as a specimen, but as an individual who'd taught humanity about compassion, coexistence, and the intelligence that existed beyond our species. Ben's body was examined one final time with my permission to extract as much scientific data as possible. Then, at my insistence, he was cremated. The Smithsonian wanted his remains for display, but I refused. Ben had spent enough of his life as a curiosity. In death, he would have peace. I scattered his ashes in the forest behind my property, in the area where he'd spent those nighttime hours over the years walking among the trees. It seemed right that he'd return to the wild he'd come from, even if only in this final way. The research station remained operational for several more months. Dr. Reeves and her team compiled their data, wrote their reports, and eventually published findings in classified scientific journals. The public received a sanitized version, confirmation that Bigfoot existed, that the species was critically endangered, that conservation efforts were underway. But the real story, the story of a logger and a Bigfoot who'd become family over 35 years, that story belonged to me and Ben. I'm writing this account in December 1993, 3 months after Ben's death. I'm 70 years old, living alone again in the house I've owned since 1958. The barn is empty now, though I still walk out there every morning, still half expecting to see Ben in his corner, waiting for breakfast. The military has offered to relocate me, to provide housing elsewhere with better facilities. But I've declined. This is my home. This is where Ben lived, where he was safe, where we spent 35 years together. I'll stay here until my own time comes. People ask me if I regret keeping Ben hidden for so long. They wonder if I should have reported him sooner, let scientists study him while he was younger, possibly learn more about his species. I don't regret a single day. I gave Ben something precious, 35 years of life lived in peace, dignity, and companionship. In return, he gave me purpose, friendship, and a connection to something beyond the ordinary human experience. We protected each other, in our own ways, from a world that would never have understood. The military's intervention, their discovery of Ben, ultimately led to protections for his entire species. If there are others out there, and I believe there are, they're safer now because Ben's existence proved they're real, that they're intelligent, and that they deserve protection. That's Ben's legacy, not as a specimen in a museum, but as the individual who changed how humanity thinks about the unknown creatures we share this world with. As for me, I have my memories. 35 years of mornings bringing breakfast to the barn. 35 years of evenings sitting together, listening to the radio. 35 years of communication without words, of friendship that transcended species. I kept a Bigfoot hidden for 35 years. The military found out, and instead of destroying what we had, they ultimately protected it. And in the end, Ben died surrounded by respect, dignity, and love. That's all any of us can hope for. Some people will read this and think I was crazy, that I wasted my life caring for a creature that science should have studied more aggressively. Others will understand that some bonds transcend scientific value, that compassion and companionship matter more than data and discovery. I know which group I belong to, and I know Ben understood too. Rest easy, my friend. Your life mattered. Your species is protected, and you were loved. That's the truth the military found when they came to my property. Not just a biological specimen, but evidence that intelligence, emotion, and family can exist in forms we never expected. And that's a truth worth protecting, even if it took 35 years of secrecy to keep it safe.